start learning now, because that doesn't take a ton of time. You can spend 15 minutes a week or an hour a week. If you spend 15 minutes a week over the course of the year, you have 10 hours of experience with AI that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But you have to be disciplined about it, treat it like a priority, and protect that time. And if you did that, if you have 100 employees or 200 employees, or if you have 20 employees, you multiply 10 hours of AI knowledge from 15 minutes a week over the next year by the number of people you have. All of a sudden, you have some deep AI expertise collectively. And hopefully some people get really jazzed about this and they spend way more than 15 minutes a week. Maybe they spend a few hours a week learning about this.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Amith Nagarajan, founder and chairman of Blue Cypress. Amith, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate being here.
Amith, this is a special episode because normally I have association and nonprofit CEOs, but so many people in my network said, you got to have Amith on the show. So here you are. Thanks so much for making the time.
Happy to be here.
So tell us about Blue Cypress.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Blue Cypress is a group of companies, and all of our companies are focused on helping associations transform both digitally, but most importantly, in a positive disruption way. So we look at the world and say, things are changing so rapidly. How can we help this sector, which we care so deeply about? How can we help it advance itself? How can we help associations transform in a positive and sustainable way? So Blue Cypress is a group of roughly 20 companies. Of those companies, more than half of them are subsidiaries, and the others are companies we've made growth equity investments into. So we've provided capital to help those companies either get off the ground in some cases or accelerate their growth. And the others are companies we've either acquired or started from scratch. So all of the companies, the common thread is they're deeply driven by a purpose of advancing this market and helping associations really accelerate their missions. In some cases, reinventing their missions, but really getting more done.
Amith, why associations? Why not any other sector?
Well, I kind of stumbled upon this market long ago, and I've been starting companies for over 30 years now. I started my first business in late 1993. And the first several years of that company had nothing to do with associations. I didn't know what an association was. And I was purely a technology company. I had these technology platforms that I was selling primarily into Fortune 1000 companies. And I was based in Silicon Valley, which is where I grew up. Things were going pretty well. And one day I got a call from an association, and the association said, hey, we, got some of your software. This was really early to be doing this, but we had downloadable software on the internet, the predecessor of the World Wide Web. We had our software elsewhere that you could download it. And this association had downloaded some of our software and found it to be really useful. And they asked us to come help them build some applications. So we said, sure. And we went over there and helped them out. And they turned into a pretty good client for us. And then we were like, what is it that you guys actually do? And we learned a lot about it. And then we said, well, are there more of you out there that are like us? And they're like, yeah, there's lots of associations. So we explored the market, and we had clients in every industry you can possibly imagine. And we decided to focus on this one because we felt that the people in this market, as we got to know more associations, were different. The people in this market cared deeply about what they did. They were serving a purpose that was bigger than just themselves. And then the kind of concept of associations, I didn't know this at the time, but it runs deep into our history, and it's a big part of democracy. So, as I learned more and more about the market, I devoted more and more of our resources to the market. And this is my old company that I've since sold. But it was a journey that took some time. And by the late 90s, I was 100% all into the market and haven't looked back really since then. I've done a few things outside of this vertical over time, but most of my professional energy has been deeply focused on this market for almost 25 years now.
Amith, it's interesting what you said about your background. I stumbled into the association space myself. And I remember back in the early days of the web thinking, wow, there is a real synergy between what the internet can do and what associations are trying to do. In that, what associations do is bring people together, but they also aggregate data and then try and get it out to the wider community. So all of a sudden, the internet just became this amazing tool for associations. And there was this great synergy that really powered my career. It's been a kind of a lifelong interest for me as well. Let's dive into your journey, right? So what kind of background gives you the experience and the skills to start all these companies and now manage this holding company of all these different companies? How does one get to do that?
Well, I've always been eminently unqualified for the positions I've been in. And that's because I've just started my own companies and said, I'll figure it out as I go. So I guess probably having a level of self-confidence that's probably too high at times is what the key ingredient for me was. But I'm somewhat serious in saying that. I think the other part of it is a willingness, in entrepreneurship, and this, to just bang your head against the wall over and over and over again and keep going forward, even if you're making very limited progress at times. For me, the first few companies, so I grew up in Silicon Valley. I started programming computers when I was 8 years old. I had, a lot of background in that just by the people that were around me. My dad and a lot of other people that I knew were into tech. This was in the 80s. I was able to learn a lot back then. And so by the time I got to school, I said, well, I know I'm going to start a company of some sort. And I think it's probably going to be software because that seems like a valuable area. And I'll go study finance. So I went and studied finance and econ in college. And that was super helpful.
Not coding.
Nope. I was this weird finance major who kept showing up at computer science labs just for fun. And I did take a number of courses, either in audit or actually took courses in university in CS. But primarily, I was there to learn how to do business stuff. So I never really even questioned whether or not I had the skills or the ability to run a company. I just started doing it. And so I was trying to find niches and opportunities. I didn't have the language back then to figure out what I was going to focus on, but I just started building products and seeing who I could sell them to.
So how do you decide to build a product? Because I'll tell you at my company, sometimes there'll be an idea and somebody will say, but no one's ever asked us for that. And what I find is, so what, right? Sometimes your clients are really constrained by what they know and what their experiences are. But if you give them something that could be so transformative, they'll latch onto it. And then there are other times when we have an idea and people kind of yawn, and clearly that's not something that they're interested in. So how do you make the decision? Or maybe it's trial and error.
I think that there's customer-led innovation where you're getting feedback loops from customers where they'll say, I want this product, I want this feature. And then sometimes there's inspiration that comes from other sources. Perhaps it's transference from another industry where you're looking at something done in financial services or in healthcare or somewhere else and saying, hey, this could work in this industry. Or something coming from sci-fi and then being applicable to what's possible and what's becoming science fact. Particularly that's true these days with AI. I think that the key question is, are you being led by the customer defining the need, meaning the pain that they have or the problem they're trying to solve? Or are you being led by the customer defining the feature set? Both are actually relevant, but if they're talking to you about their pain, for example, I need to get from my home to my work faster, more cleanly, and more safely. Do I invent a faster horse or do I make automobiles affordable, right? And so that's the Henry Ford quote about if the customers were to be asked what they wanted, they would say a faster horse. Really what they had is a problem. It was dirty, it was unsafe, and it was slow to get from point A to point B. And so, the automobile helped solve for that, right? Solving the pain points. So customers are always in touch with their pain. And sometimes they're in touch with what could be beneficial outside of their pain points. But I think the pain points are a key place to listen very intently. For me, early in my career, this is even before associations, what I noticed in the business application world, so I've always been in enterprise software, so building different kinds of business apps. And my first company, our product suite was a tool set. And so we had this set of tools for building database applications. And We worked with companies in Silicon Valley like Hewlett Packard, Sony Corporation, Clorox, a whole bunch of, and Clorox is not a big tech brand, but they're a big company in the Bay Area. And all these big companies hired us to do these projects, and the common threads were still there, even though they were radically different. So we built these big, large-scale business applications, and they all had the same fundamental building blocks that were needed. And so we came up with a framework that was able to solve for those needs for any application that anyone could come up with. It was a generic architecture, and no one would have asked us for that. Well, probably not. Someone may have. But it was a need that they all had. And so then when we approached it by saying, hey, we've got 10, now 20, now 50, now 100 plus clients that are asking us for these custom apps, if we built a framework that gave us acceleration, but gave the customer better features, functionality, more reliability, that could theoretically be beneficial. And that's what we did. We decided that there was a common pain point, and that's what led to the development of that framework, which ultimately actually became this company called Aptify that a lot of people in this market know as an AMS, which I sold that company in 2016. But that company's roots were in framework-based development, which actually led to a whole lot of things that happened in the association vertical really well. But yeah, I mean, it was a set of pain points we were solving for. People did not want to spend as much money, did not want to take as long as they were needing to build these apps, and we solved that by building that framework.
Amith, you're clearly someone who listens to his customers to find the feature sets that they need as well as the needs. But where else are you finding inspiration? I want to know where you're hanging out and what you're reading.
Well, I read as much as I can and as broadly as I can. So I have, things like The Economist and The Wall Street Journal and The New York Times and a whole bunch of other things I scan, but I am always reading books. I love to read a whole bunch of different books. I read a lot of business history. I read a whole bunch of different things across actually different historical contexts, but I also read books in other domains. So I was recently reading a book on the history of the periodic table of the elements and how that came to be. Don't quiz me on it because I've already forgotten most of it, but it was fascinating just to hear about the stories of innovation from like the days of alchemy to the days of when modern chemistry started to kind of appear on the scene and how people, went through these doubt cycles and the original ideas were kind of thrown against the wall and then thrown back at the innovators saying this is garbage, And so I try to be involved. I try to read a lot of those things. I also try to be involved with people who have similar sets of beliefs in the sense that not that they agree with me, but that they also like thinking about stuff that's outside of the accepted norms, perhaps. So entrepreneurs are a great group. We were just talking about groups like Vistage and EO earlier. These are groups of entrepreneurs who are known for being the folks who are willing to go out there and take, in a lot of cases, unreasonably high risks and see what happens. And that's a fun group to hang out with, for one. It's just most of my friends ultimately end up being entrepreneurs at this point because they're people I can relate to.
Yeah.
But you hear all sorts of crazy stuff when you hang out with entrepreneurs. And how do you apply that back to your business? And sometimes you don't even tuck it away as a note. It just influences the way your mind works.
Amith, sometimes people will say to me, gosh, how do you manage the risk? It sounds like you're not afraid of risk or you're not afraid of failure. And I say, oh, hell no, I'm always afraid of failure, but I have to manage the risk. So how do you manage all that?
I think early on for me, I just didn't even think about it because I figured, I was super young. I had nothing to lose. I came out of an environment where I didn't have any resources to begin with, financial or otherwise. So I figured, well, if I crash and burn along the way, I'm no worse off.
Absolutely.
I'll go get a job. So in some ways, I think entrepreneurs who start super young, like I did, have it kind of easy because you're not giving up anything. You're not saying, hey, I've got kids, I've got a family, I've got, a good job that I'm giving up. I didn't have any of that. So I just said, all right, well, I'll go do this thing, see what happens. So that was my risk management early on. And then, after a certain level of success, I've been able to kind of compartmentalize how I take risk, where I'll take risk kind of in a portfolio basis, where I'll have higher risk assets that have potentially outsized returns. And then I'll do also things that I think are medium risk, and I'll pull them in a portfolio where I'm more comfortable with the risk profile and therefore potentially willing to invest more. And then I'll have things that I kind of rely on as a bedrock. So, and that's not just financial, it's also how I allocate my time. I like to think about kind of the fundamentals where you have to go back to and do them well. In any business at any time, you have to have narrow priorities. You have to focus relentlessly on them. You have to take care of the maintenance. It's like brushing your teeth or anything else that you do. No one wants to talk about doing that stuff, but you forget to do that for long. It's not pretty. And that's very much the case in business. then you can, if you have a reasonable base, you can then have a budget for experimentation or risk taking. Again, whether that's financial or time based, right? I can say, hey, I've got things kind of well running over here. I can go allocate a couple days a week to experimentation. That's probably the biggest thing for me is I have more time available than most people, not because I have more time in the day, but because I do a really good job, I think, of two things. One is I narrowed down what I'm willing to work on. So saying no is what that boils down to. If I have 50 ideas, I pick 2 or 3 of them and I'm willing to mothball or kill the rest of them. The other thing that I'm very willing to do is to kill projects in flight, whether it's a financial investment where I've made an investment in a startup or one of our own companies at Blue Cypress, or if it's something, I'm writing a book or whatever, I'm just like, this idea is garbage. I'm going to get rid of it. I've gotten to the point where I just don't care about killing that stuff off. And a lot of people, the sunk cost thing doesn't really occur to them and will carry all the way through with the project.
Right.
That happens in IT projects all the time where it's dead obvious to anyone, even moderately objective, that the project's not going to succeed and people keep rolling with it. So I think there's a degree of objectivity that you kind of get from experience, but I don't know. I think a lot of people are way too emotional about that stuff and let it get to them and aren't willing to separate themselves as a person from their projects and being able to kill off projects quickly.
Amith, let's take this back to the association space. So you and I know a lot of association CEOs, and some of them are very conservative. Some of them are a lot more entrepreneurial. What's your recommendation for experimenting, for trying new things in this crazy environment that we're in right now? We're exploding with innovation. What do you think association execs need to do to manage this? And remember that they have boards.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Boards are both a blessing in the sense of the potential wisdom that you can glean from boards. And of course, they are representative of your broader mission and your membership. And they can also be challenging, particularly depending upon your culture and your governance structure. And coming back to the heart of your question, I think that what leaders need to do is create more free time for themselves to think. So many leaders are spending their time chasing their tail. Day in and day out, they just are email and task and calendar people, right? They've almost become AIs themselves, where all they do is they follow the email. Like if I get an email, I have to immediately stop what I'm doing and read the next email. Or what's next on my calendar? My calendar has 50 meetings over the course of a week. How can I possibly get anything done? You have to have more open time and you have to expose your brain to things outside of what you're used to. Otherwise, you don't expand your thinking. So maybe it's joining a group that has people that are outside of your space. Maybe it's picking up a book on a topic that you maybe are interested in, maybe not, but just something you don't know a whole lot about. I just think it's a really important thing to start to carve pathways in terms of your neural net, but just also in terms of your time that are different. To me, that's the number one thing. And I think that from an experimentation perspective, you almost can't stop yourself from experimenting if you give yourself just a tiny bit more free time to think creatively. Creativity is celebrated for a period of time in our journey as humans, but that period of time usually ends once we have double digits with our age. Because once we go from like lower grades where you're trying to like get every kid to do artwork and you're celebrating creativity to like, we turn into basically items on a factory assembly line, pumping out, what standardized tests, and then we get into college and then we go to work and we're not really doing creative thinking a lot of times. So anyway, those are some thoughts I have. I think that leaders in this space are no different than leaders in other spaces in that regard. But I do think that association leaders tend to also say, I can't do X because my board says Y. Like they say something else, right? And I think that every time there's an objection like that, the CEO needs to look at themselves as the salesperson in chief. And their job is to have a conviction around their vision and you go sell it to the board. I know that's easier said than done, but I also think there's a lot of defeatist mindsets out there where people say, well, the board said no, and then they give up on that idea that they might remake their whole space and remake their whole association. You got to go fight for that stuff. But you can't do that if you're chasing your tail, doing meeting after meeting after meeting. You have to have a little more airtime.
Amith, I think that's why you and I are in groups like, I think you're in YPO and EO, you said, and I'm in Vistage. And for me, it's just been so valuable to be away from the office for a day, meeting with other CEOs, hearing about what's happening in other industries, and like you said, kind of giving my brain a break from the day-to-day of running Matrix.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I have a group of folks in the association space. We have a CEO mastermind group that I run with a co-host who you probably know, Mary Byers. She and I partner together to run this. And the focus is on AI, but it's almost exactly what you're saying. It's 90 minutes once a month virtually. And then once a year, we get together in person. And the whole idea is to get your brain out of what you're doing. And in this case, think about AI, but it doesn't matter what the topic is. You could be talking about British literature or something. It doesn't make any difference. Just get yourself out of the rut of doing what you're doing normally, and that'll expand everything in your world.
Amazing advice. Let's turn to AI, because you say that most of your time these days is really focused on AI and almost cheerleading for associations on their AI journey. And it seems to be a thread in your entire corporate network. So tell us about this interest and what's it doing for us?
Well, AI is, in my opinion, the most transformative technology that any of us will ever experience in our lifetimes. And I think it's going to be a wave that we see, whether we ride it or we're crushed by it. It's a wave that's here, and we'll be seeing it continue to accelerate and evolve in the coming decades. AI is at an exponential growth rate. The AI curve is doubling in power every 6 months. So that's a statistic a lot of people really can't comprehend, because even what we've had with Moore's Law, which is the historical doubling of computing power every 24 months for the last 50 plus years, this is 4x in terms of the cycle time, which means it's basically 8 times as fast when you compound it. So it's crazy what's going on with AI. And the reason I quote all that is because these numbers, they're just numbers. But when you think about the capabilities and what that means, when you think about language being unlocked and being able to communicate in any language you want across any medium, whether it's video or audio or through text, and you think about the things that we've struggled with as associations and association leaders for so long, the opportunities to solve these problems have never been greater. It's like we've accelerated into this sci-fi world almost. So to me, there is both tremendous opportunity for associations to serve their missions far more effectively and far more broadly than ever. And there's also fundamental systemic risk right now, because what associations do well is they gather people, they connect people, they inform people. And those are all functions that can be done through other mediums. Now, people have been saying associations are at risk and may go away ever since those days in the early internet. And I don't think associations generally have gone anywhere, because the fundamental idea of having a not-for-profit in the sector that serves the people in that sector is really compelling, and people want it to work. But associations are so tradition-bound that they have a hard time understanding that their products and services may not be what you need in the future. You think about the fundamental idea of how you certify an accountant or someone in a particular branch of medicine or law. You say, well, how is that certification going to change? How is the education delivery going to change because of AI? It's going to change a bunch. And so what I'm trying to compel associations to think about is to envision that future and then to go build that future, to build the strategy and then to execute it, to have the capabilities that the future profession that they serve will need. That's what a lot of my work is. I spend my time roughly half between Sidecar, where we deliver all of our education, which is really at the intersection of AI and associations. And the other half of my time is spent on product innovation. So I work with product teams across our family of businesses to help launch a variety of new AI products.
Well, Amith, let me ask you a question. So I had a meeting with a client recently, and we were trying to get them to do an AI pilot. And we had a call, and they said, we're trying to figure out what the need is. And we talked about 25 things that maybe they could solve with AI. And then the response was, well, our CEO is traveling for the next couple of months, and then we're going to go into the summer months, and then we've got a board meeting. So I'm thinking, personally, what Joanna Pineda thinks is that associations these days actually have an obligation to their members to be experimenting with AI because it is so transformative and because it could really help them to serve their members better. But it's hard to get out of that. It's going to be 8 months before I talk to them again about this. So what do you say to an association like that?
Well, doing something is better than doing nothing. And so what I always push, we across Blue Cypress have a dozen plus different companies that all sell various products and services. So there's a lot of things I could tell you to go do with AI that are self-serving and are across my portfolio. But that's not what I typically do. I say, listen, just go play with ChatGPT, spend $20 a month and just talk to it and see what it can do. If you want more structure, there's a whole bunch of learning resources out there. Google, Amazon, Microsoft all have free AI learning resources. We have a ton of free content on the Sidecar website. Start learning now because that doesn't take a ton of time. You can spend 15 minutes a week or an hour a week. If you spend 15 minutes a week over the course of the year, you have 10 hours of experience with AI that you wouldn't have had otherwise, but you have to be disciplined about it, treat it like a priority, and protect that time. And if you did that, if you have 100 employees or 200 employees, or if you have 20 employees, you multiply, 10 hours of AI knowledge from 15 minutes a week over the next year by the number of people you have, all of a sudden you have some deep AI expertise collectively. And hopefully some people get really jazzed about this and they spend way more than 15 minutes a week. Maybe they spend a few hours a week learning about this. And we see stories of this all the time across our community. There are early adopters that are doing cool things. And actually, most of the ones that I get excited about hearing from are not the technical people. I love the technical people. They're my people. I love talking to them about technical things. But what I get excited is when I see someone that's decidedly non-technical by way of background who's embraced this technology and experimenting. And we have people like that in the community that I really get excited about what they're doing. So to me, it's not about the big project that the board needs to approve or like when do you get like all of these gears aligned to go after it. It's just do something small right now and get started. So that's my main advice to people. I talk about AI all the time on stage and in webinars and stuff. People usually ask me, what's the first thing I should do? And it's always learning. There's all sorts of other stuff you can do, but spend a little bit of time every day, every week, and do some learning.
Well, speaking of learning, you've got some events coming up that will help association execs really deepen their learning about AI fast. So tell us about those.
Sure, happy to. So in May, we have 2 Innovation Hub events. These are Blue Cypress events, May 2nd in Chicago and May 14th in DC. And these are single-day events, and they're designed to really give you a lot of ideas to take away that hopefully you can then put into action. Various people from across our family of companies presenting from their actual experience working with real associations, diving into details, giving you tangible takeaway value. So those are a couple of events coming up in the next 30 days or so. We also have our AI Learning Hub online, which is kind of an asynchronous thing, and that's available to go through any time. And we actually have a monthly Intro to AI webinar on the Sidecar website. If you just go to sidecarglobal.com, every month we run, it's not the same webinar because it's changing so fast, but it's an Intro to AI webinar. It's a great way. It's totally free. It's a great way for people to just get started with something. Last month, I think we had a couple hundred people jump on and start learning AI. We've educated many thousands of people now since last March or April when we started doing these things, which is by itself is super exciting because for the preceding 10 years or so of doing AI stuff in the association market, it was hard to get people to pay attention to AI. In the last year, it's been easy.
Yeah. Well, let's take it back to what my listeners do, which is run an association. So you've got these events coming up. There are only about 10,000 conferences coming up on AI, right? Big companies like Google and Microsoft and all these companies are offering conferences. So how are you making your events different so that I decide to give you my time and my money?
Well, it's all about focus. One of the things I do when I advise startups, whether they're in our family or outside, I do a fair bit of work trying to help early stage startups when they're just getting started, right? So that's to me an important personal thing to give back to. And one of the most important things I try to convey is a super narrow focus in terms of the addressable market you're going after. So a lot of people talk about a term in the startup world called TAM, T-A-M, which stands for total addressable market. I actually like to refer to a totally different term, which is the smallest viable market. So SVM, which is basically the narrowest possible market that is viable, meaning it's big enough to actually build a business around. And the reason I mention that is that's very much our approach across all of our companies, and particularly our events. We're not trying to cater to everyone, have like something for everyone at our events. Digital Now is a great example. So that's our flagship event every fall. It's basically like Sidecar's annual event. And we always focus at the intersection of innovation, leadership, and obviously heavily on AI these days. So it's very much an AI conference, but it's focused on associations. So that to me is the big part, is picking the narrow niche. So for us, our content is contextualized to what associations are thinking about, what they're worried about. And that seems to make a big difference. It's like that last mile problem. Another way to think about it is, what's the difference between an AMS and a CRM? And a lot of people would say A lot. Some people would say not much. Software-wise, if you compare like the code base of what goes into Salesforce with what goes into an AMS layer on top of Salesforce, it's like 50 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 even maybe. But that last layer is what contextualizes the capabilities of that software to the market and makes it worth a lot more. And events are very much the same thing. I can tell you, hey, go to any number of these other events on AI, and they're probably great. But when we contextualize it for the association market, that seems to help a tremendous amount.
So it's AI events and conferences really tailored to the association market.
Yes. Every single thing we do is focused on the association sector.
Are you doing anything different with regard to the format of the conference? Because I know a lot of my listeners are focused on that. How do we make it so that post-pandemic, people actually want to come to the conference?
The format varies. So for the one-day events, we try to make it very tabletop, interactive, conversational. So the innovation hubs, I think, are like 80 people or something along those lines. They're not big. And so the idea there is to have really intimate settings with, they're quick, simple, easy to do kind of events where you can build relationships and share knowledge. Digital Now is a much bigger event. It's 300 people, 200 people, something in that range each year, depending on location. There, what we try to do is change the format around actually pretty much regularly to get ideas as we go. But with the format we've used the last couple of years that seems to work is we have a broader theme for the whole conference. And then for day one, we have a sub-theme. Day two, we have a different sub-theme. We program it so that we have 4 keynotes per day. There are session breakouts, but we're heavily focused on the main stage to deliver kind of the main punch in terms of the education. And then the last day of the event, which is a half day, we have it as like a brainstorming lab with a mandate that says you must walk out of this event with a single item that you're committed to implementing between now and next year's Digital Now conference. And that's been super popular. I don't have data that says since we started doing that 2 years ago in New Orleans, and we did it again last year in Denver, the percentage of completion that people have had on their one thing. But the idea of getting people to spend half a day distilling down what they learned in the preceding 2 days and then come up with a single priority that they are committing to themselves to go do is a lot more likely to result in outcomes that are positive than not doing that at all.
Right.
So we're building it into the conference. We've all walked away from conferences saying, oh, I've got all these great ideas. And then you go right back to what you were doing and you forget all about it a day later. And so that's an experiment we've been running, but we're always trying different things. We also spend a lot of time cultivating speakers and bringing them in from outside of the sector. So we do have speakers from within as well, but we think it's really important that association folks listen to people from outside of the field. When we talk about different kinds of innovations, one of the first questions I get from associations, which I understand, but it's the same question every time is, show me another association that's already doing this. And when you're starting from very low numbers, with AI, it's still early days. It's hard. We can show AI case studies for sure, but it's very difficult early on to do that. And so my reaction is, well, let me show you what someone like JP Morgan is doing. Let me show you what a startup down the street is doing. So I think there has to be a little more mental flexibility around it. That's why we bring in speakers with different experiences and different backgrounds to educate our audiences.
Hey, Amith, before we go, I got a question for you about leadership. Has your leadership style or has the running of the company changed post-pandemic?
I would say that yes, it has, because I don't think anyone could say no to that because the world has changed so much. I'm an office guy. I like being in the office. I like being around people and working and coming up with ideas like on the fly, those kinds of the water cooler conversations. I've always enjoyed that my whole career. So it's been tough for me personally to not be in an office environment on a regular basis. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And at the same time, we're a bunch of technology companies, basically. So we've been comfortable with virtual settings and work from home and weird hours for years. That's something that we were doing even back in the 90s at some level. So in some ways, we were well prepared for all this as a technology company. But I think as a species, we're biologically hardwired to want to connect. And so it's difficult. So when you're not with people, the way you communicate is different. And therefore, the way you lead is different because you can't just sit down with someone nearly as frequently, or in some cases at all. There's people I work with I've never met and probably never will meet in person, and not necessarily full-time employees, but we also work with tons of freelancers. That's the other part. And that's not a COVID thing, but just in general, over the last 10, 15 years, the gig economy and the freelancer market has exploded globally. And so sourcing talent for highly specialized skills is so easy to do so quickly now that you have much larger team sizes, even if these people are working for you in fractional quantities. So that's also a challenge. And I think that's accelerated since COVID probably because, it's made people more comfortable with the idea of remote talent. And once they're over that hump of like, I don't need to see this person in my office, they're like, well, there's literally millions of people out there that can go on Upwork or whatever other tools to get access to talent.
Amith, is there a Blue Cypress culture? Or does each of your companies have their own culture and somehow you wrap it all together in Blue Cypress something?
Yes, each company does have its own distinct culture, and Blue Cypress has a culture as well, which we like to think influences all of the individual companies. We know it does. The way I define culture is that you think about culture as a fundamental belief system that is going to permeate the way you actually do what you do in your business. So a combination of a very clearly defined core purpose statement and a set of core values that are essentially operating principles, and you weave them through your day-to-day practice. Each of our companies has its own purpose statement and its own core values. We heavily guide the formation of those fundamental cultural building blocks, but we don't dictate them. We allow the companies to really develop those and own those themselves. And they're necessarily different. So for example, a company like Rasa, which we chatted about earlier, their core purpose statement is to better inform the world. So to better inform the world, to them, what they build is an AI newsletter tool. But what their purpose is to better inform the world. The way they get there in their minds is they say, well, listen, we have a software tool that uses AI to deliver the most relevant content to each person at the right time for each individual. So if associations are using this, or if anyone's using this to deliver their content, we're doing a better job of getting the right content to Joanna and to Amith and to others every day and every month. And that's better informing the world. So that purpose statement guides their decision-making, how they build their product, how they sell to customers, and they have a clear value system too. And we have those things at Blue Cypress as well, but they don't necessarily, not designed to fit together as pieces. They certainly can't be incompatible. We can't have values that go against one another.
Right.
But we have a diverse set of cultures, but the common thread really is a deep passion for service and for advancing this particular market. So people we hire, companies we acquire, all of that, we have to find that common thread where there's this deep feeling of mission importance that if we can help this sector advance, we're making an impact on the world.
Amith, I could talk to you all day, but I know that you're a busy man. I want to thank you so much for everything that you shared today. We will be sure to put links in the show notes to all this education that you talked about, as well as to some of the services that Blue Cypress has to offer. And I hope you'll come back in the future because AI is changing our lives. And I want to get some case studies of some of your clients and all the amazing things that they're doing. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!